Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We all crave those aha moments, right? Like that spark of understanding, getting to the core of things without drowning in too much info.
Totally, and that's what we're all about here, finding those nuggets of wisdom.
Exactly. Today, we're diving deep into an idea from Seth Godin's All Marketers Are Liars.
Oh, a classic.
It is, and this one line really stuck with me. No one buys facts, they buy a story.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It is. And, you sent me some really interesting excerpts from the book, and this idea kept coming up. So our mission today is to unpack this, like, why does this matter? How does this impact how we see the world, how we make decisions, even beyond marketing?
It's deeper than just, clever ad campaigns, that's for sure. Godin really gets at the heart of human behavior here.
Absolutely. So let's start with one of Godin's core concepts, belief. He states that once we believe something, it becomes a self-fulfilling truth. Like, wow, that's profound.
Right. It's simple, but so true.
And he gives these great examples, like, imagine you're at a wine tasting. You're told one wine is, like, way more expensive. Suddenly, it tastes more complex, right? You notice these subtle flavors.
Yeah, you start, analyzing the bouquet, searching for those nuances. Because you believe it's better, your experience actually changes.
Exactly. It's like our minds are wired to seek out confirmation of what we already think.
Absolutely. Another example is, think about a new boss at work. If everyone starts off believing they're going to be an amazing leader, that positive perception can actually influence how people interact with them.
Right, and potentially lead to that success just because of that initial belief. And even like something as simple as driving a car, if you believe it handles well, you probably enjoy the drive more.
You feel more connected, more in control. It's fascinating, isn't it? How our beliefs shape our reality.
Totally. But here's the question the book asks. If this is so obvious, why do we constantly miss it?
Right, not just marketers, but us as consumers.
Yeah, why do we sometimes get swept up in the story without really examining the facts?
It's like we want to believe. And a perfect example of this is the case of Rideau glasses.
Ah, the fancy wine glasses, yeah.
Yep. Georg Riedel, the guy behind them, is adamant that the shape of a glass impacts a wine's aroma and taste.
And people buy it, literally and figuratively.
Oh, yeah. You see it on their website, claims that the glass conveys the wine's message to your senses. And they've got big names backing them up, too. Thomas Matthews from Wine Spectator even said that wine tastes better in a Riedel glass.
And there are studies that supposedly back it up, right? Like wine experts could tell the difference in blind taste tests. And they claim that these glasses can elevate even like a cheap bottle of wine.
Yeah, that's the big sell. But here's the catch. When truly rigorous double-blind tests are done, the results get murky.
Meaning?
The perceived difference often disappears when you take away the taster's belief about which glass is which.
Ah, so it's not necessarily the glass itself, but the story we tell ourselves about it.
Exactly. We're buying into the idea of enhanced taste, the narrative that this special glass will unlock hidden flavors.
It's like a placebo effect for wine.
In a way, yeah. And this goes beyond just wine glasses. The book gives tons of examples where the story outweighs the actual, factual differences.
Like what?
Okay, think about the Porsche Cayenne and the Volkswagen Touareg. Same platform, many of the same parts built in the same factory.
But one's a Porsche, one's a VW.
Huge price difference, completely different brand stories. And that's what people are paying for.
It's the image, the association. You're buying into a lifestyle, not just a car.
Totally. Or even, a new laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really that much faster than your old one? Often, the real-world difference is minimal.
Especially for everyday stuff, yeah. You're paying for the newness, the shiny new toy, not necessarily a huge performance boost.
And then there's the whole antibiotic-free egg thing.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that at the store.
All laying hens in the U.S. are raised without antibiotics. It's just like the law. But people still pay extra for those labels.
It's the peace of mind, the story that those eggs are somehow, healthier or pure.
Exactly. And this shows how marketing has changed. It's less about selling commodities and more about tapping into our wants, not just our needs.
So instead of just saying, hey, this is better and cheaper, it's more about creating a story, an emotional connection.
Right. It's about making us desire something, even if it's not drastically different from what we already have.
So if stories are so powerful, what makes a good one? What are the ingredients of a compelling story?
Well, the book lays out a few key characteristics. First, great stories make bold promises. They don't just aim for good, they aim for exceptional.
Like they promise to change your life or something?
Maybe not that dramatic, but yeah, they offer something truly unique or transformative. like the band Fish, for example. Their story wasn't just, we play good music. It was this whole experience, this almost spiritual connection with their fans.
That makes sense. It's about creating an aspirational feeling like you're part of something bigger.
Exactly. Second, good stories don't just appeal to logic. They appeal to our senses.
So like using imagery, sounds, maybe even smells.
Yeah, think about the subtle power of, like, pheromones or the design of an Alessi teapot. It's not just functional, it's beautiful. It evokes a certain feeling.
It's that emotional resonance that pulls you in.
Right. And third, the best stories aren't for everyone. Trying to please everyone usually means pleasing no one.
You got to find your niche.
Totally. Like the Livestrong bracelets, they started with a very specific community, cancer survivors and supporters, and that authentic connection helped the story spread.
It's about finding your tribe, the people who really get it.
Absolutely. And fourth, great stories have to be consistent. They can't contradict themselves.
So like if a fancy restaurant is in a bad neighborhood, that clashes with the image they're trying to project.
Yeah, any inconsistency can break the illusion. Authenticity is key. The story needs to match the reality.
So everything you do, every detail, reinforces the narrative.
Precisely. And finally, and maybe most importantly, the best stories resonate with our existing worldview.
So they don't try to change your mind. They confirm what you already believe.
Exactly. They make you feel like you're right, like you're part of a group that understands things, like the Keels example in the book.
Oh yeah? What's their story?
Well, their whole brand is built on this idea of being unique, authentic, almost quirky, and their stores reinforce that.
How so?
Like, they'll have a Ducati motorcycle on display or a vintage airplane. The decor is super casual, not your typical fancy cosmetics counter.
It's like, we're different. We don't follow the rule.
Exactly. And their staff are super knowledgeable, more like advisors than salespeople. And the products themselves, with those detailed labels, it all feels very personal, almost scientific.
So it's a whole experience, not just buying a face cream.
Right.
Yeah.
And it works. They've got a super loyal following and can charge premium prices, even though they're owned by L'Oreal, a huge corporation.
It shows that the perceived value is tied to the story, not just the ingredients in the bottle.
Totally. Another interesting example the book gives is the early granola market.
Oh, like back in the hippie days.
Kinda, yeah. Even before big marketing campaigns, the idea of granola as this wholesome, natural food resonated with certain people.
It fit their worldview.
Exactly. And once that story took hold, the big companies jumped in with their marketing dollars. But the initial success came from that existing belief.
That's interesting. So the story was already there. They just amplified it.
Right. And this brings us to a broader point the book makes. Marketing is about more than just selling products. It's about spreading ideas.
So like it can have a real impact on society.
Absolutely. Godin argues that marketing is one of the most powerful forces in our world. It influences everything from public health to politics, education, even religion.
Wow, that's a big claim.
It is, but think about it. Even getting people to adopt healthier habits, that requires marketing. Or raising awareness for a cause. It's all about telling the right story.
That makes sense. You need to connect with people emotionally, make them care.
Exactly. And the book mentions how much pharmaceutical companies spend on marketing, even more than research and development.
Really? That's great.
It shows how important storytelling is, even for something as scientific as medicine. They need to convince doctors and patients that their drug is the solution.
It's not enough to just have the facts. You need to sell the story.
Precisely. Now, the book talks about how marketing has evolved over time. There was a time when mass advertising was incredibly effective.
Like the Mad Men era, where everyone watched the same TV shows and read the same magazines.
Exactly. Back then, you could reach a huge audience with a single message. And it worked because consumer needs were perceived as more homogenous.
But that's not the world we live in anymore.
Nope. Now, with the internet and cable and social media, attention is fragmented. People have so many choices, and they're bombarded with messages all the time.
So how do you break through all that noise?
Well, the book outlines 4 key steps for successful marketing in today's world.
Okay, lay 'em on me.
Step 1. Worldview matters. People's pre-existing beliefs determine what they notice and how they interpret information.
So if your message clashes with their worldview, they'll probably just ignore it.
Most likely, yeah. Step 2. People notice what's new and different. They're wired to pay attention to change.
That makes sense. We tune out the familiar.
Exactly. And when they do notice something new, They immediately form a first impression, a guess about what it is and whether it's relevant to them.
And those first impressions are powerful, right?
Incredibly powerful. That's step 3. First impressions stick. A brief exposure can lead to a lasting judgment.
So you got to nail that first impression.
Absolutely. And step 4. The best marketers tell stories we already believe. They tap into those pre-existing narratives and reinforce them.
It's all about aligning with that worldview, making people feel like you understand them.
Exactly. Now, the book also talks about the challenges of positioning in today's market.
Like where your product or service fits in compared to the competition.
Right. Traditional positioning was all about being cheaper or faster or more luxurious. But in a fragmented market, that's not enough.
Because different people value different things.
Totally. You have to consider their worldview. The IKEA example is great. They don't just sell cheap furniture. They frame it around this relatable experience.
Like, finally got your cheap spouse to go furniture shopping with you.
Exactly. It's funny and relatable for a certain group of people, but it wouldn't work for everyone.
So the strategy is to identify a specific worldview and tailor your story to that.
Precisely. Don't try to change people's fundamental beliefs. Find the people who already share your vision.
Because those are the people who will be most receptive to your message.
Exactly. And the book reiterates that worldview affects everything we do, especially how we perceive new things.
Okay, break that down for me.
First, it affects our attention. We only notice things that are relevant to our existing beliefs and needs.
So we filter out the rest.
Right. Second, it affects our bias. We all have preconceived notions, desires, even grudges, and those color how we see new information.
So we might interpret things differently based on our own experiences.
Exactly. And third, it affects our interpretation. We understand things through the lens of our worldview.
So the same information can mean different things to different people.
Precisely. To illustrate this, the book has this great list of, do you agree with these statements? Questions.
Well, that's interesting. What kind of statements?
Things like, do you believe new technology generally improves life? Or do you trust prescription medicine? Or even, do you prioritize price above all else?
So it's getting at those core values that shape our decisions.
Exactly. And the book uses the example of premium tea in the U.S. to show how ignoring those worldviews can be a mistake.
Like people didn't think Americans would pay a lot for tea.
Right. The prevailing belief was that tea was just like a cheap drink. But brands like Republic of Tea and Tazo proved them wrong.
How so?
They targeted a specific worldview, people who wanted a more luxurious tea experience, something special and refined.
So they created a story around it, about the origin of the tea, the health benefits, the ritual of brewing.
Exactly. It wasn't just tea, it was an experience. And it resonated with a certain group of people.
So they found their niche and tailored their message accordingly.
Precisely. And this highlights a larger point. There's no single mass market anymore. It's all about identifying those distinct worldviews.
So instead of trying to reach everyone, you focus on the people who are most likely to connect with your story.
Exactly. And the book talks about the challenge of bridging those different worldviews.
Like if you have a great product that appeals to one group, how do you get it to catch on with a different group?
It's tough, but it can be done. It requires understanding their worldview and adapting your message.
So you can't just use the same story for everyone.
Nope. Now, the book emphasizes the importance of authenticity throughout all of this.
Meaning what?
Every touch point, every interaction a customer has with your brand needs to reinforce the story you're telling.
So your website, your ads, your packaging, even how your employees act.
Everything needs to be aligned. If there's any inconsistency, it can damage your credibility.
It's like you can't just say you're authentic. You have to live it.
Exactly. And this ties into the power of first impressions. The book talks about how we make snap judgments all the time, and those judgments tend to stick.
It's like our brains are wired to categorize things quickly.
Right. And once we've formed an opinion, we tend to seek out information that confirms it, even if it's not totally accurate.
So that first impression is crucial.
Absolutely. And word of mouth plays a big role, too. People are more likely to believe a story if they hear it from someone they trust.
Makes sense. We rely on our social networks for information.
Totally. So if your story is consistent and authentic, it's more likely to be shared and believed.
And that builds credibility over time.
Precisely. Now, the book has this interesting example about recycling, which highlights how powerful a lie can be.
A lie.
Well, not a lie in the traditional sense, but a story that we tell ourselves, even if it's not entirely based on facts.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So even when the actual benefits of certain recycling programs are debated, people get upset when those programs are canceled.
Because they feel like they're doing something good for the environment.
Exactly. It aligns with their worldview. Recycling makes them feel responsible, like they're making a difference.
So the story is more powerful than the facts, in a way.
Right. And the book suggests that building a lasting brand often involves creating these kinds of stories, stories that tap into deep-seated beliefs and make people feel good about themselves.
So it's about more than just selling a product. It's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
Exactly. Now, to illustrate how our brains are wired to notice change, the book uses a simple analogy: a frog and a fly.
Okay, I'm listening.
A frog's brain is optimized to detect movement, specifically the movement of a fly. It's how they survive.
So they tune out everything else and focus on that one thing.
Right, and our brains are similar. We're constantly scanning our environment for changes, deviations from the norm.
Like, you might not notice the dust on your bookshelf until it's really bad, but you'll immediately notice if something is out of place.
Exactly. We're wired to pay attention to novelty, and this is crucial for marketers to understand.
Because if you want people to notice your product, it needs to stand out, be different.
Precisely. And once we've noticed something and formed an opinion, it's hard to change our minds. The book talks about cognitive dissonance.
Which is?
Basically, the discomfort we feel when we encounter information that contradicts our beliefs.
So we tend to reject that information, even if it's true.
Often, yeah. We cling to our existing narratives, and this highlights the importance of making a good first impression.
Because once that initial judgment is made, it's tough to reverse it.
Totally. Even something as subtle as the font on a Starbucks sign can influence our perception of the brand.
It's like our brains are taking shortcuts, relying on those familiar cues to make quick decisions.
Exactly. Now, the book defines authenticity as a consistent story that a business not only tells, but actually lives.
So it's not just about saying the right things. It's about doing the right things, too.
Absolutely. Your actions need to match your words. And this is where the distinction between fibbers and frauds comes in.
Okay, explain that one to me.
So, fibbers are essentially storytellers. They might embellish things a bit, make their products seem a little more appealing.
But they're not necessarily lying, right?
Right. As long as the product delivers on the basic promise, consumers are generally okay with a little bit of embellishment.
It's like, we expect some marketing fluff.
Totally. But frauds are different. They're deliberately deceptive, often with harmful consequences.
So they're intentionally misleading people for their own game.
Exactly. And when those deceptions are uncovered, it can be devastating for the brand.
Like, it destroys trust.
Absolutely. The book gives the example of Cadillac, which lost its way by relying on its past reputation without updating its story.
So they became a fraud in the eyes of consumers.
In a way, yeah. They weren't living up to their own hype. And then there's the Nestlé baby formula scandal, which is a truly awful example of harmful marketing.
I happened there.
Nestlé aggressively marketed their formula in developing countries, exploiting the belief that Western products were superior.
And that had tragic consequences, right?
Yes. Many babies became sick or died because they weren't getting the proper nutrition. It's a heartbreaking example of how marketing can be used for evil.
And it highlights the responsibility of marketers.
Absolutely. The book argues that we have an obligation to be ethical, to consider the consequences of our stories.
Because our words have power.
They do. And ultimately, the success or failure of a story is measured by the impact it has on people's lives.
So if your story leads to harm, it's a failure, even if it makes you a lot of money.
Precisely. And the book makes an interesting point about how we view certain lies.
Okay, like what?
Things like magic tricks or makeup. We know they're not real, but we accept them because they're entertaining or they make us feel good.
It's like we suspend our disbelief.
Exactly. But there are other lies that are unacceptable, like selling watered-down baby juice or spamming people with unwanted emails.
Those are just plain wrong.
Right. And the difference is that those lies exploit people. They violate trust.
So there's a line between harmless embellishment and harmful deception.
Absolutely. Now, the book also emphasizes that storytelling doesn't negate the need for a quality product.
So you can't just spin a good yarn and expect people to buy anything.
Nope. The product still has to deliver on its promises. But the story helps frame that experience. It creates meaning.
It's like the story makes the product more desirable, more memorable.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the SUV example. People often buy SUVs because they believe they're safer, even if that's not always true statistically.
It's the story they tell themselves, the feeling of security and capability.
Right. And the book raises the question, is it wrong to believe a story, even if it's not entirely factual?
That's a tough one. I guess it depends on the story and the consequences.
Exactly. And that's where the responsibility of the marketer comes in. We have to be mindful of the potential impact of our stories.
So it's not just about selling. It's about doing good.
Ideally, yes. Now, the book argues that long-term success comes from telling authentic and beneficial stories.
So it's not just about a quick buck. It's about building something sustainable.
Right. And that requires trust, which is built through consistent storytelling and ethical behavior.
It's a long game, not a short game.
Exactly. Now, the book gives a couple of historical examples to illustrate the power of narratives on a larger scale.
Oh, like what?
Well, the Gulf of Tonkin incident is a great example of how a fabricated story can be used to justify war.
So the story was a lie, but it had real-world consequences.
Tragic consequences, yeah. It shows how powerful narratives can be, even when they're false.
And it makes you think about how stories are used to manipulate people.
Absolutely. And then there's the classic tale of the emperor's new clothes.
Oh, yeah, the emperor who parades around naked because he's been tricked into believing he's wearing fine clothes.
Exactly. And no one dares to point out the obvious because they're afraid of looking foolish.
It's a story about conformity and the fear of challenging authority.
Right. And it shows how powerful social pressure can be in shaping our beliefs, even when those beliefs are clearly wrong.
So we can convince ourselves to believe a lie if everyone else is doing it.
Sadly, yes. Now, the book argues that in today's world where information spreads so quickly, authenticity is more important than ever.
Because it's harder to hide the truth.
Exactly. People can easily fact-check your claims, and if they catch you in a lie, it can damage your reputation irreparably.
So you have to be careful about the stories you tell.
Absolutely. And the book uses car brands as an example of how different stories appeal to different worldviews.
Like what kind of car you drive says something about who you are.
In a way, yeah. Like Aston Martin represents luxury and performance, while Toyota Prius is all about efficiency and environmental consciousness.
So you're buying into a certain image, a certain set of values.
Right. And even though some car brands like Jaguar, Volvo, and Range Rover are owned by Ford, they still maintain their distinct identities through their stories.
So it's not just about the car itself, it's about the brand, the story it tells.
Precisely. And the book gives the example of Vivian Cheng's Soy Luck Club, a small business that has built a loyal following by being authentic.
What's their story?
It's a coffee shop that embodies a certain kind of bohemian artistic vibe, and people who connect with that worldview flock to it.
So it's not about mass appeal, it's about finding your tribe.
Exactly. And they've grown organically through word of mouth because people who love it tell their friends.
It shows that authenticity can be a powerful marketing tool.
Totally. Now, the book also warns about the dangers of losing that authenticity, like what happened with Cold Stone Creamery.
Oh yeah, the ice cream place. What happened there?
They started with a great story about making fresh ice cream right in front of you with all the mix-ins, but as they franchised, the quality and the experience became inconsistent.
So the story got diluted.
Right, and they lost some of that initial magic. It shows that as you grow, it's important to maintain those core values, that authenticity.
So you can't just scale up without thinking about the story.
Exactly. Now, the book goes into a lot of detail about the importance of every touch point.
Naming.
Every little thing contributes to the overall story a customer experiences. The smells, the sounds, the lighting, the way employees dress, even the font you use in your marketing materials.
So it's all about creating a consistent and immersive experience.
Exactly. And this requires attention to detail. You can't just throw things together and hope for the best.
It's like every decision you make is a chance to reinforce your story.
Precisely. And the book points out that unremarkable attributes don't make for good stories.
Like just saying your product is good quality or affordable isn't enough.
Right. It needs to be more than that. It needs to be remarkable, something worth talking about.
So you need to find that unique angle, that hook, that will grab people's attention.
Exactly. And when it comes to competing with existing stories, the book suggests finding a way to split the market. Instead of trying to appeal to everyone, find a specific segment with a different worldview and tailor your story to them.
So you're not trying to change minds. You're finding the people who already agree with you.
Precisely. And the book uses the example of masa, a super high-end sushi restaurant. They don't try to compete with more affordable sushi places. They target people who are willing to pay a premium for the best.
So they found their niche and own it.
Exactly. And this leads to the idea of extremism in storytelling.
Meaning what?
The book argues that the most successful new offerings often come from people who have a strong, uncompromising vision.
So they're not afraid to be different, to stand out from the crowd.
Right. And they live their story authentically, which makes them believable.
It's like they're not just selling something, they're sharing their passion.
Exactly. Now, the book talks about the size of the lie.
What does that mean?
It's about how big of a change you're trying to make. Big, overarching brand stories can be effective, but small, incremental changes often go unnoticed.
So you need to find that sweet spot, something that's different enough to be remarkable, but not so different that it's unbelievable.
Exactly. And the book uses the example of Little Mismatched, a company that sells mismatched socks.
That's kind of quirky.
It is, but it works because it's framed around a specific mindset, a playful, rebellious spirit.
So they found a way to make mismatched socks cool.
Right. And even design elements can tell a story, like the big, bulky fenders on an SUV.
They convey a sense of ruggedness, capability.
Exactly. It's a visual shorthand for a certain kind of lifestyle. Now, the book talks about the challenges Sirius satellite radio faced in its early days.
Like they had a great product, but people weren't buying it.
Right. The problem was that many people didn't see a need for it. They were content with their existing radio options.
So they had to find a way to change people's perceptions.
Exactly. They had to tap into a different worldview, one where having access to hundreds of channels was actually a desirable thing.
And they eventually succeeded, right?
They did, but it took time and effort. It shows that even a great product needs a good story to sell it.
And sometimes that story needs to challenge existing beliefs.
Totally. Now, the book gives the example of Lun Poly, a travel agency that used the scent of coconut in their offices.
That's interesting. Why would they do that?
To evoke a sense of vacation, of escape. It was a subtle way to tap into people's desires and create a positive association with travel.
So it was more than just a gimmick. It was a deliberate part of their storytelling.
Exactly. And the book contrasts that with the diamond industry.
Like Tiffany & Co. versus Blue Nile.
Right. Tiffany's tells a story of luxury and tradition, while Blue Nile appeals to a more pragmatic consumer who wants a good deal.
So they target different worldviews.
Exactly. And the book argues that the record industry failed to understand the worldview of PDP file sharers.
Like Napster and all that.
Right. The record companies saw them as thieves, people who just didn't want to pay for music.
But there was more to it than that.
Definitely. Many file sharers valued access to music, especially new music, more than ownership, and they were willing to share and collaborate.
So the record companies missed an opportunity to connect with a new generation of music fans.
They did, and it cost them dearly. Now, the book contrasts Goodyear with Michelin.
What's the difference there?
Goodyear is known for its blimp, which is a great marketing tool, but they don't really have a strong brand story beyond that.
Whereas Michelin has built a reputation for safety and reliability.
Exactly. They've cultivated a specific narrative, and it resonates with consumers.
So even in a seemingly boring industry like tires, storytelling matters.
Absolutely. Now, the book introduces the concept of audience fertility.
Meaning what?
It's the idea that some audiences are more receptive to certain stories than others.
Like they're more likely to believe and share the message.
Right. And the book gives the example of RBC, a Canadian bank that targeted new immigrants.
Why new immigrants?
Because they're going through a period of transition, their worldview is shifting, and they're more open to new ideas and relationships.
So they were a fertile ground for RBC's story.
Exactly. Now, the book also talks about how our perceptions of things can change over time.
Like you might love something as a kid, but then as an adult, you see it differently.
Totally. Nostalgia plays a big role, but also our own personal growth and experiences.
So what resonated with us at one point in our lives might not resonate with us later on.
Right. And this can be a challenge for businesses. How do you maintain relevance as your customers evolve?
It's like you have to adapt your story to keep up with.